and I am based in a town called Magherafelt in Northern Ireland, and I run a small social enterprise called Prospect Towards. And the workshop today that I'm co-facilitating with my colleagues is in relation to the work that I do for Prospect Towards. I'm also the president of IACD, so I'm wearing two hats today. But at this point, I'm here as director of Prospect Towards. And I'm joined by three co-facilitators for this workshop. So I'll just ask them to introduce themselves very quickly so that you know who they are. Donna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Donna Stewart and I work in Northern Ireland, managing a volunteer bureau. It's lovely to meet you all.
That's brilliant. Michelle?
Hi everybody, my name is Michelle and I work in a local authority in Northern Ireland called Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon Borough Council. And it's lovely to be here today. Thank you.
And Chris?
Hi, my name is Chris Leach. I am the chairman of Craigavon Area Food Bank, and I also coordinate community transformation initiatives for a group of churches in the Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon area.
That's brilliant. So our workshop today is all focused around a programme that has been running for a 6-month period from around November time 2020 until the end of March 2021. And the focus of that programme was all around shared leadership. And I was facilitating that programme, and Michelle was wearing two hats in relation to that programme as a representative of the council officers who were responsible for commissioning the shared leadership programme and working from a community planning context. And then Donna and Chris are two local participants in the programme who are from the community in the voluntary sector and running very important programmes of work at a local level in the council area that Michelle had mentioned. So we're going to share with you our experiences of the programme and then invite you to consider some questions. But for starters, we have a question for you. So I'm just going to very quickly share a slide and ask you this question. And I'm going to ask you this question and invite you to put it into this link. So I'm going to put the link into the chat and it will come up with the question, what does the term shared leadership mean to you? So if I just find the chat, there it is. So if you click on this link now that's come into the chat, it should take you straight to a screen with that question, and you will be invited to put in up to three words that you associate with the term shared leadership. Has everybody been able to access it okay? Yep, brilliant. So if you can do that, that would be great. And I'm going to hope that the technology works here and stop sharing this screen and start sharing a different screen. If I can find it. Wonderful technology when it works. Okay, so I can see things happening here. I'm going to try and screen share this now with you. You still all adding your words? Keep popping your words in. What does shared leadership mean to you? Looks like a few people may have said empowerment. Any other words that you're still putting in, or are you finished? That's okay. Did you put them all in together, Dee? You can keep adding, I think, as well, if you want to. Yeah, brilliant. Empowerment's still coming out the biggest. Togetherness distributes power, collaboration, collective, intentional, that's a good word. Great, this is really good. A few more, still getting empowerment out as the biggest. That's brilliant. Okay, thank you. What we're hoping to do today in our workshop is to pick up on some of these themes, and the concept and the idea of empowerment is certainly going to be one of the strongest. I'm going to stop screen sharing this screen right now, but if you want to keep adding in there, by all means do, if you have the opportunity to, and we'll maybe come back and have a little look at them at the end. But we've got a few slides that we want to share with you as well. So just to tell you about our experience of the Shared Leadership Programme. And I'm going to kick off with a little bit of an outline of what we're hoping to do. So we're going to tell you about the Shared Leadership Programme that ran, and you're going to have the opportunity to hear from some of our panel members who took part in the programme, and then we're going to open it up for discussion. And we've got till, I think, about 3:20 UK time, that is. So I'm going to hand over first of all to Michelle, who's going to give you a little bit of background context all about the programme. Michelle, over to you.
Hi, Anna. Thanks everybody for coming along today, this morning, this evening, or wherever you are in this part of the world right now. The power of technology is amazing, as we've seen all morning. As I've already introduced myself, as Michelle, and I work in a small community planning team. We're a small team, and we're really passionate about making connections and adding value through collaboration. I'm very privileged to get to work along some strong community leaders within our community voluntary sector panel, who show kindness, empathy, and strive for real lasting change for their local communities every day. And you'll hear from them in just a moment. Just to set the context around our place, we are one of 11 local council areas based in Northern Ireland. There is a population of around 214,000 within the borough, and it comprises both rural and urban communities with diverse populations. So I'm going to give you just a wee bit of context about community planning firstly. So the purpose of community planning is to improve the well-being of an area and quality of life for those who live there. And it requires all sectors working together. That includes health, education, housing, businesses and communities. And when we talk about community planning, we also think about societal well-being. And this means everyone having what they need to live well now and in the future. And community planning offers an opportunity to think differently. It brings everyone to the table, from decision makers, policy makers, researchers, sports people, artists, communities, all together to develop and consider all the important impacts on people's lives. So this means removing the barriers which make it difficult for people to take up employment or to stay connected with family and friends. It means enabling residents a choice and opportunity to participate in local decision making, and it means thinking long term when making decisions that will affect the people here in the future. So our first community plan is called Connected, and it's a long-term overarching plan until 2031. And its purpose is to improve the social, economic and environmental well-being of the borough. And within our plan, we have identified 3 themes of community economy in place, and also 3 very important cross-cutting themes of connectivity, equality and sustainability. So whenever we were developing our plan, our partnership and our action plans, our partnership decided to adopt 3 ways of working. that we make sure we include in everything that we do. And these are partnership work in community engagement and using evidence. There is a community plan partnership, which is the custodian of the plan. And that's important because there's no one organisation that can realise the long-term outcomes in Connected. And we believe that working together will result in the better outcomes for the people and places. The partnership is a broad network. And before the pandemic last year, we had over 300 people from over 90 organisations sitting on different groups of the partnership. And we've really seen the value in those networks and relationships over the past year. And the partnership is an opportunity to join up a lot of the great work that's been happening across the themes. As well as working together, we also believe in involving local people in the decisions and actions of the partnership. We know we'll get better plans and policies this way, and we also think there's value in bringing people together to have conversations about their places and their services and building connections and trust. Bringing together the community, experts, local policymakers and practitioners and community ensures that everything we do is based on evidence of real need. Anna, do you want to just move to the next slide, please? So, why a community and voluntary sector panel? Our borough has a vibrant and diverse community, voluntary and social enterprise sectors. And in 2018, through a community engagement and co-design process, a community and voluntary sector panel was established. And it was established to make sure that these sectors were partners in the community plan process. And this was the first time the whole sector in the borough was invited to come together and connect. And the panel is a formal part of the community plan structures. The panel has a membership of about 60 community and voluntary sector and social enterprise groups and organisations. And these representatives play an important role in keeping the wider sector and the local communities involved. And the panel had agreed 4 key roles, which are shown there on the slide. Over the years, the panel has hosted a number of really successful events in the song, shed and social prescribing. They undertook a survey last June of the local community response to COVID during the first lockdown, and this illustrated the scale of the community response and support. And as a partnership, we're committed to new and innovative ways to empowering communities and residents. And over the past few months, the partnership has run its first participatory budgeting project, Take 500, which had over 3,500 people voting to commission over 66 health and wellbeing projects in the borough. And that's just the start of our partnership, looking at how we put local people in control of decisions about where money is spent. And we hope to develop that work further to more mainstream decisions about where budgets are allocated. And a major success in that project was having 7 members from the community and voluntary sector on the steering group, along with statutory agencies. A shared leadership approach is central to the development of an inclusive community plan process, and the panel has been really fortunate to have support and resourcing from the Carnegie UK Trust to be able to participate in the co-designed shared leadership programme, which we'll hear a bit more from Anna now. And while there is still a lot to be done in terms of response and immediate recovery to the pandemic, we will continue to learn and grow from this together. Thank you. Well, Anna, just back to you then.
That's great. Thanks very much, Michelle. So to tell you a little bit then about what the programme actually sort of looked like, the rationale for it, as Michelle has said, was the importance of recognising that shared leadership that's distributed across all the different people involved in the process was really important in terms of promoting a collaborative approach to taking forward community planning. And so the shared leadership programme was very much about recognising that that is challenging, and it is an area that people and communities would develop, would appreciate and value and benefit from support around developing in terms of the way of working. So the shared leadership programme was intended to support the implementation of the community planning process, but also very much support the development of the community and the voluntary sector across the borough with building skills, building knowledge, building confidence, and also in reinforcing and strengthening the voice of the community and voluntary sector, not just around the things that were identified as needs, but actually involved in decision-making processes as well. And essentially, the shared leadership programme was an underpinning pillar of supporting the delivery and implementation of community planning within the borough. Now, in terms of what we took to be shared leadership, we spent some time exploring what that might mean before narrowing down what we wanted to focus on through a co-design process in terms of the programme itself. And the frame for community for shared leadership from the community and voluntary sector was very much about collective and participatory decision-making processes, recognising and taking shared responsibility, so that distributed responsibility amongst everybody who was involved in the process from different communities, different community and voluntary sector organisations, but also when working with other sectors, that was also a collective and distributed process as well. Working towards a shared vision and shared values, and community development and the values of community development were specifically part of the underpinning framework for community planning in Northern Ireland. So that shared vision and values was fundamentally based upon those community development values, as well as some additional values, as Michelle has highlighted in relation to the plan. Creating opportunities for everyone to lead appropriately when they were in a position to step forward and utilise the skills and strengths that they had to offer, and recognising that people could move backwards and forwards in that process as well, but also very much around creating the opportunities for meaningful dialogue and inquiry, recognising that that's how development takes place, but it's also through those processes of reflection and challenging and questioning, exploration, that new ideas emerge. So the idea around dialogue and inquiry was seen as really important to development and to new ideas. But as we've been talking about today in terms of connectedness, underpinning all of that was a recognition of the importance of building strong, trusting relationships. Not just in, a vacuous context, but very much in a strengths-based context that enabled collaboration and partnership working to take place amongst those who were participants. And ultimately also recognising that the process was very much based on a learning culture, and that it was an iterative developmental process too, so that constant learning would be re-embedded back into that process of building leadership. So we did have a co-design process exploring all of that in the round before narrowing down what we wanted the programme to focus on specifically. And the 5 key points there on the left-hand side of your screen are the 5 key areas and thematic elements that the programme focused on. So working with others to build shared sense of purpose and foster commitment, building respect and trusting relationships, promoting effective communication skills, not solely, but specifically with external and other agencies and communities. So communication that took people outwards and into new relationships. Strengthening collaborative working was critical and absolutely fundamental, and also in relation to decision making. And then finally, how to influence to positive effect, because ultimately the purpose of community planning, and as we know, community development is about positive social change. So influencing for positive effect was critical as well. The programme ran from October last year until the end of March this year and was designed to be experimental. It ended up being a lot more experimental because when we first started the conversations about the programme, we weren't in a lockdown situation. So the whole programme ultimately was delivered online, and was very much about creating space for reflection, for learning, for peer support, but also learning and development. After the half-day co-design workshop, we followed that up with 3 learning and practice seminars with keynote inputs. We had 5 training workshops around the 5 themes that I've just highlighted, and an international case study seminar day where we had a variety of international inputs and local inputs and a lot of discussion. And that was in the middle of the 5 training workshops. And then the programme culminated with a celebration and a reflective learning event. So this just gives you a flavour of some of the inputs and inspirations that we engaged in the programme around. As I said, some were from Northern Ireland, some were from closer to home in relation to other parts of the UK. We had Claire McGilvray from Scotland, which was one of our IACD directors. Other directors inputted from other parts of the world. We had Michelle Dunscombe from the Ada Institute talking about experiences with Firefoxes Australia. And then we had Catherine Monjoey, who's an IACD director as well, talking about her work with Life Bloom Services in Kenya. But we had other inputs too, some other local ones, the guys from Rathlin Island, which is just on the north coast of the north of Ireland, and Kerry Melville from Belfast, talking very much around sustainable food networks. Claire Biner from Scotland as well, and then Angus Lamkin, who was a UN standby expert on mission, who's from Northern Ireland, happened to be back in Northern Ireland for lockdown, but drawing on his international experience, and then some inspirations from folk from England and the Gloucester Community Building Collective. So all of that kind of sharing of knowledge and ideas and experience was all something that was in the mix alongside our experiences of what we were going through here in Northern Ireland. And when I say our, I mean specifically all the participants together. But a lot of that was based on people's experience of working on the ground. And there's just a flavour of the different types of organisations that took part in the programme as well. I know some of those names won't necessarily mean anything to you, but they are a range of organisations, some of which were during lockdown providing really critical support. And Chris and Donna, who are here today, will be able to talk more about that. We had some special focus groups, so around older people's networks, young people, those who are coming particularly from a health and well-being or a sports sort of interest, community of interest, people who are working with people with disabilities, with women, rural communities. So a really wide range of mix there that took part in the programme. And that all added hugely to the learning. And a lot of text on this slide, but just a flavour of some of the feedback that people were giving as we were coming towards the end of the programme, and the benefits that people felt the space and the opportunity to explore the ideas of leadership offered. The feedback was hugely positive, and I mean that you know, that's great for anybody to hear, but actually it was in terms of impact that a lot of that positivity was being expressed. And that makes for very good community development practice when there is impact that's hitting the ground. So we had 100% of the participants say yes, they were very satisfied or extremely satisfied, but 92% plus said it was very beneficial, and over 100% found the learning in practice seminars with all the different inputs from people in other areas, drawing on their experience and knowledge, really beneficial as well. So a lot of those benefits were around having the space to reflect. Chris and Donna will be talking about what was going on for them during that time, yet making time to be part of the shared leadership programme gave the opportunity for folk to be able to step back and just process some of what was going on, which also linked up very much with the feedback around the self-care and the recognition of the need for people working in community development, in doing difficult work in very difficult circumstances, actually to be mindful of self-care and of those that we're working with. But also recognising that there was a conviction, there was courage, there was passion that people were showing, and being able to share those experiences during that time really helped to build trusting relationships amongst participants who are part of that community and voluntary sector panel. And all of those things have created a really strong set of relationships to take forward the work of the community and voluntary sector panel in terms of implementing community planning, but also strengthening that sector, that community and voluntary sector in the Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon Borough Council area. So I'm going to hand over now to Donna, who's going to tell you a little bit about her experiences on behalf of the Craigavon and Banbridge Volunteer Bureau. Over to you, Donna.
Thanks, Anna, for that. As Anna said, I had the privilege and the pleasure of being part of the leadership course. And it comes a time in my life, as opposed for all of us, a very unprecedented time when we were suddenly hit by a pandemic and people were very frightened and very afraid. So as a manager of a volunteer bureau, my thought come to me that people are our biggest resource. And that come to me one night and I thought, what can I do? What can I do to make a difference in this community? I also manage a project for people with disabilities who needed to shield and couldn't have access to food. So having thinking about all those and at the same time undertaking the shared leader program, one of the things that come to me was about working with others to build a shared sense of purpose and foster commitment. And I needed to people come with me. I realized very quickly I couldn't do this on my own. I needed to take people with me. So I put out a call for volunteers, and within 48 hours, 173 volunteers signed up to help me, which was absolutely fantastic. But again, I still couldn't do it on my own. So through the leadership course, there was such a diverse range of partners that were involved. Altogether, I engaged with 52 partners. Some of those partners were doing the leadership course and others weren't. Others weren't doing it. And I worked with the 52 people on the ground to target those who are most need. And the other thing that come to me really quickly is that I needed to build trust and respect with those that needed the help. And what would be very important to me in terms of community development is about letting people have their dignity, about taking people with me, and about asking people, what is it you need? Why should I presume that I know? So I got in touch with the people that were shielding and I asked them, what is it you need? And very quickly the emerging issues were they needed food, young mums needed nappies, baby milk. This one wee gentleman said to me, I need my paper every day. You know, and that always struck me that was that connectivity. He needed to have that contact with the outside world. You know, for people it was different things. But it was very important that the people that I was going to help would trust, that I would trust and build up a respect and a rapport, and that they would trust me to lead them. In terms of the 52 groups, I had to lobby on their behalf for PPE and for food, and also ensure that good practice guidelines were adhered to, that if volunteers weren't well, they wouldn't turn up. All those issues were really key on the ground. And as I was doing the leadership course, it really grounded me. It helped me to keep standing back, to self-care, to stand back and say, you know, lead from the back. What is it I'm doing? Why am I doing it? You know, am I taking people with me? Are people feeling included? To let people know that it wasn't about my own agenda. It was very much in these unprecedented times about coming together as a community to help those in the ground. And what I see with the Bureau was that we acted as a conduit and we led the other groups. And yes, we did lobby for food and we did lobby for PPE, but at the forefront of it all had to remain about what people needed. The teamwork was excellent in it. Without the teamwork, it wouldn't have worked so smoothly. There was also supporting the supporter. Volunteers were going to see delete boxes of food for people who had lost their loved ones to COVID and they weren't able to go to the service. And there was huge emerging issues of loneliness and depression and anxiety. And we also set up a befriending group, again with volunteers, a good morning, it was called a good morning call where people would ring up people to see how they were. And for those volunteers, they were listening to that heart-rending loneliness of people that hadn't seen their loved ones for a year, who were feeling very isolated, were feeling very afraid. And, you know, as the pandemic got worse and worse and worse and the numbers rose and more people were dying, it was this very scary place to be. So what was important to me was to empower people to take responsibility and for the role that they did have in their life, and do the things that could help them. And what happened very quickly was, which was amazing, some of the people who were receiving food for the first couple of months started to get in touch with me and ask me about becoming involved themselves. So I always talk about there's nothing stronger than the heart of a volunteer. So those people come on board and they started to help others. There's no stronger advocacy than those of those who used the service. The people that were on the disability project that I run, we were able to get them material, and they started to make masks. They were also making baby hats, knitted blankets. It was about giving them, knowing that they could play a part in the community, even though they couldn't go outside the door. It was very, very much about bringing them with me, about recognising the skills that they had and how they could utilise the skills. So it was very much about communicating with people at all times. You know, when there was a problem, getting to the ground roots of it, talking to people. That was key. That teamwork had to be key to make it work. My leadership course was every Friday, and you know, it was a lifeline to me. And every Friday I was able to go back to the 5 core principles of the leadership and community development. And I had an absolutely fantastic facilitator. I will embarrass her by saying who was Anna, and she was just a rock to me. She's an amazing facilitator. I had the like of Chris and other participants who helped me to ground. It helped me to look at where I was and what I was doing, and never to lose sight about why I was doing it, and to always be ensured that it was about teamwork, that it was about connectivity, and it was about people, making sure that people felt involved and that they didn't feel left out. And making sure at times that I did stand back, and that was crucial to make this work. I suppose looking back now, I think in terms of stats, over 12 months, 18,500 deliveries were made to people across the Craigavon, Banbridge, Lurgan and Portadown area, delivered by these 173 volunteers and our own staff. And I always think about this one day where I'm laughing. I got a call the night before New Year's Eve to say that there was 100 turkeys available. Can I get them out? And I kind of said to my husband, who was sitting watching the TV, do you fancy delivering? I'm laughing because the craziness of it. Do you fancy delivering 100 turkeys tomorrow? And he looked at me like he thought I had lost the plot. So I was able to get 10 other volunteers, and I really recognised that that was family time. And those 10 volunteers stepped up to the plate, and together we delivered those 100 turkeys over an area of about 25 miles. You know, and he often laughed because our hands were freezing, you know, and my hands were cold like they'd never been cold before. But the camaraderie and the good spirit, apart from my husband, who was absolutely disgusted that I pulled him away from the TV, you know, but there was a sense of giving these turkeys to people, and they were absolutely delighted. You know, that day will always stay with me. A community coming together at such a difficult time to make sure those who were shielding and vulnerable could have their turkey on Christmas Day. You know that was really key to me. In terms of and building other partnerships, that was key as well. It was really important to work collaboratively with other people. I had to go to local authorities and I had to lobby for funding. I had to speak on behalf of the other 52 groups. And all those key core principles come into everything that I done. The trust and the respect, the communication, empowering people, acting as a leader, but remembering to listen. To never assume that I had all the answers, because no, I would never have all the answers. And to keep talking to the people who needed our help. And what was very important to me was about letting them have their dignity. For us, it was not about photos on Facebook. It was not about seeing who got the box. It was about helping people to help themselves, and never wanting people to feel, because it can be very difficult for people to ask for help. And we understood that. And we always made people feel that their confidentiality was paramount. So as I say, very quickly, the last thing that we were able to do, which was fantastic, I was able to lobby with the local authority for a small grant for £25,000 to support those volunteers that had used their own travel. And what we were able to do was we were able to fund over 1,000 volunteers in the end, and 52 groups to get that funding. So I have to say the leadership course in terms of what I was doing helped to direct me and lead me, and it was an absolute pleasure. So thank you.
That's great, Donna, thank you. And I know you're so passionate about the whole volunteer experience and those wonderful people that you were working with, that you want to honour them with telling their stories. And hopefully we'll get to hear a little bit more about them when we get to the discussion point. But I'm going to hand over now to Chris, who's going to tell you something of his experience during lockdown and in relation to the Shared Leadership Programme as well. Chris.
Brilliant, thanks, Anna. Yeah, so it's great to be able to talk about what we did, and really my remit is to do with food and how we addressed food crisis. So in our area, we had around really 50 plus groups giving out food support between March and June of 2020. And all those groups a lot of them started from nowhere, maybe sports clubs, different organizations seeking to help in their community. So probably at the height of it, during the first kind of major lockdown, when we didn't really know what was happening and people were constantly reacting to the problems in our community, there was around about 12,000 people receiving food help across the ABC Council area. So that's a population, as Michelle had said earlier, of well over 200,000 people. So as we moved out of that first lockdown and moved into the summer and then into September, one of the things that we started to realize was we can't repeat the work that was done in the first lockdown. Although it was really good in a lot of respects, many people received lots of food support, and many people who could have done with support didn't get any, and they were missed out. So that's when we started to think, well, how can we work alongside with our local government a little bit better to address the needs of the community? But what happened during that first lockdown is that the community sector realised its importance and the part that it played in what I like to call the last mile of doing the end user support, face-to-face contact, a lot of which Donna has described. And so what the community sector started to realise is actually we have a strong voice here to speak to local government around the type of support that we would like to see happen in our communities. And so as the Shared Leadership Programme was starting, we were having a lot of conversations in the community sector about what had gone really well in terms of support in the community and what had gone badly, particularly around food support, how we could do that differently. So with encouragement from the leadership programme, I started to link together the 3 other food banks who worked in our area. And so we would have had a little bit of contact before that, and we would have done a few things together. But the COVID crisis provided an opportunity for us to work together a lot more. And so what we were also able to then do, along with staff within our local government council, was to start co-designing an approach to response. We'd always found before that the council would say, here's what projects we want to prioritise, here's the funding, the community sector can apply for the funding, away you go. Whereas now they were asking us what needs to happen in the communities and how can you help us to understand what the real needs are. And we do have resource, how can we allocate that resource? And as we going through the community or the leadership programme, it really helped to think, right, well, as the 4 food banks in particular, who are doing more or less the same thing across a wide geographic area, how can we collaborate and coordinate what we do in such a way that we don't duplicate resources, that we share where we need to, that the people that maybe were missed in the past get covered. And probably a very quick story to illustrate the effectiveness of that and how we started to work together. And really, I suppose, under the theme of trust as well, is that we were offered the opportunity for some funding that was going to be allocated and split between the 4 food banks by a local government department. And that funding was to be given out on the basis of population size covered by each of the 4 food banks. So initially, then one of the 4 was going to get 47% of the allocation, and the one of them was going to be given 10. But one of the groups that was going to be given a smaller allocation, knowing the needs in another area, suggested that they would give up some of their allocation for it to be given to another group. And that really started a conversation where the 4 food banks were able to completely change the funding allocation percentage between the 4 of them and allocate it out fairly based on the relationships that we'd built, the trust that had been built up between us, how we appreciated and understood what each other was doing, to the point there where the 2 larger areas that were being covered geographically each got 35% of the funding, and the 2 smaller areas got 15%. So in my group's particular case, our allocation went down from 47% to 35%, but that meant that other groups' allocation of funding went up. And so that was a good thing to do. It was probably the right thing to do. But what it then did also was to show how the community sector was stewarding the resources that it was being given, how it was working together for the common good. And so then during the 3rd lockdown, which was right in the middle of us doing the shared leadership program as well, was actually funding which was all food based. So we didn't see any of the actual money, but £120,000 worth of food support was allocated to our area. And so the 4 food banks decided, along working with the government, that what we would do is try and coordinate a bigger project across a wider area and start to involve key trusted partners who had links with specific communities and specific need to get support out there. And so what we were able to do during the 3rd lockdown was to have 4 key food banks providing food, and then an additional 13 community organizations that were doing very specific work to get food out to them. So we created effectively a food hub and coordinated that project to get that food out to people who needed it the most. If you just want to go on maybe to the next slide, if that was all right. So just very briefly, what the shared leadership program really helped us to do was to build relationships and develop trust and to seek consensus. And the thing about that was that it takes more time and more effort. And in the middle of a crisis, it just seemed like it was Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. But the level of relationship and trust that was developed meant that as we not only got to know each other, but got to know each other's organizations and their strengths and weaknesses, is that we could support each other more effectively, which was brilliant. The second thing on resilience is that we were enabled to strengthen each other by teamworking to maximize our own strengths and those of our partners. So my organization is quite big, and we're very good at doing kind of central distribution type of work, and other organizations are better at on the ground with end users. And so we took a lot of the distribution work off them, and then helped to do all that in the background so that they could be more effective in the work that they're delivering. And I think just sticking to what you're good at is really, really important. But you can only do that when you've built enough relationship and trust with other organizations to work in partnership with them, to let them do what they're good at too. A third thing, just empowerment, that we created opportunities for our volunteers to thrive and trusted them, give them the trust that we have been given, from government, by being given resources, and sharing wisdom on a regular basis was really important. And so we really benefited from technology as part of this, having things like Zoom, having things like WhatsApp, having the leadership program delivered, and having input from all around the world. We were able to listen to best practice and put that into play. We were able to meet with people who maybe were socially isolating, but we were still able to see them over technology. But as we're building these relationships, I think one of the things that I saw sometimes, but not very much, is that some groups wanted to talk about themselves and how brilliant they were. And then another group would maybe start talking about how brilliant they were. And it can get into this competitiveness. I'm doing this and we're doing that. But when we take the time to listen and celebrate the success of others, it creates a depth of relationship that we can really build upon. And so the last thing I just wanted to say in my last slide, if that's okay, is that in our sort of culture in the United Kingdom and Ireland, we don't have a word like the words that are on the screen at the minute. And so during the first lockdown, I read a BBC News article about this word, dugnad, which is a Norwegian word. It means we all work together. And their nation and their government declared a state of dugnad, or they declared this word during the first pandemic. They basically said, this is a time when we should all come together and all work together for the common good, because this is how we're going to get through this crisis. You may be more familiar with it. I believe there's a Kenyan word. I'm going to say it's Harambe, which means all pulled together, or Ubuntu, which is another word you might be familiar with, which is I am because we are. And in a very individualistic westernized culture that we are in, I think that we came back to this principle of working together for the common good, of maximizing our own strengths, of actually supporting each other where we're weak. The shared leadership program provided a sort of a background, ongoing discussion for that, and encouragement, listening to the wisdom and strength of others to continue to do this. And as we move forward out of hopefully COVID full stop, I think that this principle of working together for the common good is something that in our community sector, I want us to continue to do on a consistent basis. So thank you, and over to Anna.
Thanks very much, Chris. And I can feel myself sort of slipping into participant mode here and wanting to start make so many more connections with the things that yourself and Donna have been saying. But what we wanted to do was to really just kind of open it up at this point for some discussion. This is a quote that I heard somebody who was facilitating groups of school head teachers across the island of Ireland a few weeks ago say to them, and it resonated with me, which was, if you're here today, then you're part of the future. And that is what community development is about. It is about people coming together to be part of the future. And hopefully some of these shared experiences and reflections in our workshop might have prompted some thoughts for yourself, but we're also really interested to hear what you have to say, and so we'd like to open it up for discussion. Particularly, are there things that you're building around in terms of shared leadership with work with communities, and what are some of the new things that have come out of the opportunities arising out of adversity in the last year that you want to hold on to as well? Because I think for us, there have been some of those things. So I'll leave it there, and stop screen sharing and just open that up for discussion. Dan.
Yeah, thank you. So what methods did you use for reflection? You mentioned that was a key part, but I didn't know how you did that within the context of the program.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I suppose kind of formally in the context of the programme, we did in each of the sessions, we would have a bit of a checking in time where we sort of circulated around everyone and just gave everyone the opportunity to share what had maybe been happening for them that week or the week before. And I think most people kind of reflected on that in relation to the themes with the programme and then their experiences in terms of the community work. And then we also used some written reflective opportunities as well. So all those quotes that you saw there on one of those slides were reflections that people were capturing after each of the sessions and thinking about what they had heard, what they'd been involved in chatting about, and what that meant for them in terms of their practice. So formally, those were the two main mechanisms, but participants, I think, in some respects were doing other things themselves as well. So I don't know, Donna or Chris, if you want to, or even Michelle as well, kind of come in terms of other ways in which you might have reflected on the programme and what we were looking at.
I think what was really beneficial for me was, that we actually ran the whole thing over Zoom, and then we would have broken up into smaller groups to discuss things. And so hearing what was going on with people and how they were reflecting based on their context and on their circumstances, because we had kind of a unique, in some ways, shared experience in that we were all going through COVID at the same time. We were all dealing with the complexities of it. We were all concerned about health, but we were all coming from different perspectives. And so being able to just listen and reflect on other people and their circumstances, what they were doing and how they were involved was good, but it was almost kind of therapeutic as well, because it just reminded you that you weren't alone. And that you were with people who were struggling with other things. And Anna was very good as well at creating sort of little opportunities for us to get to know each other on a personal level, which I think really changed the dynamic of how we discussed and how we listened to each other. So even like sharing things that were personal to us or things that are important to us. I remember I brought my bicycle into one of the Zoom calls one week, and somebody brought their dog, I think. But these were fun things, but they just created a dynamic where we really appreciated each other as people as much as what we did as well.
Dee, I noticed your hand up. Yeah.
Yep. It was actually to Chris, and that almost gave me a little bit of my answer. But I was noticing on your stages of lockdown 1, 2, 3, the involvement of the services was at first looked to be a big, like, everyone's in, and then it kind of coordinated efforts as it kind of you went through others. I was just wondering what you noticed in reflection of that kind of that shift in dynamics of having 50 or more services all running about, and I can only imagine sometimes with like a chook with its head cut off, to kind of coming to a coordinated effort that ended up with, what was it, 12 or something that were at the end the coordinating. So yeah, just wondering on your reflections of that shift.
Sure. So I suppose as COVID unfolded, it was a unique situation. And as we found, like, literally any and every community group wanted to do food and get food out to the community. And having done that sort of thing for years and years, it was like watching a car crash in slow motion for me in some respects. And so I suppose I even had to keep stepping back and going, yeah, but people are wanting to help. And so we did a survey. So from March to the end of June, most of that work happened. And we actually did a survey just at the end of June and asked all these groups what they were doing, what their reflections were. And so we had information that was really hot on exactly who was doing help, what was being done. But also we asked them questions like, well, what do you think are going to be the needs going forward? And the need, what was fascinating was that food became a conduit for other support, because it was the only reason you could knock somebody's door. It was the only reason you could come up to a stranger. And so actually around mental health and well-being, around isolation, those kind of things, actually that was the real issue of COVID. The conversation with the food box on the doorstep was more important than the food that was in the box a lot of the time. For some people it was the thing, but for a lot of people it wasn't. And so community mobilized in the only way that they knew how. So our government support actually finished at the end of June as lockdown ended, and actually a lot of those organisations were just relieved to be able to finish because they started something which was very hard to maintain. And so it was at that point where, I went to our local government and went, there was lots of really good things. Here's the research that we did at this moment in time that tells us what was really going on. Here are some of the priorities around isolation and loneliness, mental health and well-being, employability, food poverty itself, and the nature of the crisis. And those actually became what we found, that what the community sector did was to uncover all of that, and those became the priorities for our whole community planning focus during that time as well. So that as we moved into the autumn time, we started that co-design process with our local government to say, we think we could probably do this a bit better. And I have to say, as much as I wanted to do that, I didn't realize just how much work it was going to take. But because there was the opportunity and the possibility to do something coordinated, we were able to pull particularly the 4 main food banks together, and that gave us one central point for our local government to go and talk to engage with. And the things like the shared leadership and the community and voluntary sector panel, we were able to disseminate out the information into the community sector to say, like, here's how we think things can go forward, and that's what we tried to do.
Thanks, Chris. Perfect answer. And thank you all. And Donna, tell your husband I'll not forget the turkey story. I just love that. Thank you.
You love stories like that, don't you, Dee? And I think that was one of the nice things that I got out of the programme as well, was actually the opportunity to connect with people on a sort of human basis. And it's a conversation that I seem to be having an awful lot in different sort of arenas at the moment, about how actually we are all just humans and we can all only do what we can each do. The power is being able to do that collectively. And also then move that forward in terms of influencing change. I mean, Donna, you talked, you touched on here, but you told us a lot about the conversations you were having with government departments, Department for Communities, about sourcing support and that recognition for all the volunteers. And actually, that was a huge amount of leadership where you were putting yourself out on a limb and doing something that was very courageous, because you were standing up to them really and arguing on behalf of a sizable group of people who were giving their all. And that's really, really important. I don't know if you want to say any more about kind of that lobbying and advocacy aspect that you were involved in.
Just to say, Anna, that and for everybody, and I'm not particularly good at this now, I'm trying to remember his name, but there was a guy from Scotland, Angus, yes, am I right?
Angus Lampkin, yeah.
So it was really timely. A couple of weeks before I put a position in paper to the local authority, I was in Angus' workshop, and he told me that I needed to be a maverick. And I said, I'm no good at doing that. And he said, you're a natural leader. You'll go in there and you'll present the story. So I believe that he helped to give me that courage. And when I went in, I knew that I was going in for the good of the people, not for me, but for them. And that gave me the courage and the belief, because I think when you do go to the local authority, you've got to really believe what you're going for. If you go in with a half idea, you'll get nowhere. To begin into the very meaning, this is what I want, this is what I need, and this is why I need it. So I'm proud to say, through the leadership course, I learned to be a maverick, but my husband said I better not stay too good at
it. Michelle, is there anything you'd like to kind of come back on in terms of what we've touched on, or share from your perspective?
No, just really that we as Community Plan Partnership, our Community Plan team, we really see the value of having being able to offer this shared leadership programme through our community voluntary sector panel. And that, as Chris said, it was often the panel reps who had done the last mile in terms of food distribution and volunteer support throughout the first lockdown. And they had come to, they had been able to, or they come across people, who had faced terrible circumstances. But so we're really fighting for them to be able to become more equal partners, in the community plan process, because a lot of the statutory partners, most of who had worked from home during the crisis, all had access to counselling services throughout their own workplaces. But a lot of the community and voluntary sector who had seen a lot of aftermath of suicide had not been able to have any access to any counselling or professional services at all. And that's a challenge for the sector, but also for us to try and advocate on their behalf a bit stronger. So that's just...
Thanks, Michelle. Any more questions or comments or reflections in terms of your own experience over the last year to 18 months, and any connections that you're making with what you've heard?
Hi, everyone. I was kind of struck by what Chris was saying about the food being a conduit for addressing other issues. I work in the Scottish Borders in an area of real deprivation, and what we noticed was a result of COVID was that it was COVID that allowed families to ask for help who'd previously not asked for help. So for over a year, I'd been working with families living in dire poverty and living with food hunger, and they had completely resisted any attempts to access food from the food banks. But when our local youth project got involved in delivering food parcels, that was at the point when they started to ask for help and accept help. And there's sort of a situation now where our local youth sector is now still providing food for our communities that are still deprived and still struggling with food hunger. And we did get funding from the Scottish Government to run a food insecurity pilot last summer. So there were some findings around that I'd be happy to share. But for me, I think what COVID has allowed is that it's okay to ask for help where families previously weren't asking for help with food, and children were going hungry.
Yeah, I think that's very true, Louise, and it's interesting because there is a difference between sort of emergency or crisis food and long-term food insecurity, and people don't necessarily feel that they can continually ask when they're continually struggling. They think that things like food banks are just for people who have nothing at one moment in time. But we have an increasing amount of people within our society who are literally, they're on a knife edge of poverty, where any one change in circumstance can tip them over. But it's how do you ask for help when you're in that constant just survival mode? And I think what we've started to do in our context is to look at ways of moving people from an initial crisis through to so things like social supermarkets, where people can pick the food that they do want and pay for it themselves, but at a reduced price, so that it's a lot more empowering. And I think the last 6 months, I've been thinking a lot about power dynamics and how so much of those are in play, particularly in the context of the United Kingdom, where we have quite a substantial government support system in place, a substantial welfare system. It disempowers people to help themselves, and shifting that power dynamic and helping people to feel that they can make a difference, that they can ask for help, but also that they can be the help that their community needs, that they can help each other. I do think there's an opportunity that COVID has created that we need to maximize, whilst there's still the environment still exists for us to have those conversations that you're talking about, Louise.
Yeah, and we saw the introduction of a new scheme based on food share, so leftover supermarket food. We've got a local cafe called Cafe Recharge who are now creating from leftover food in supermarkets. They're creating amazing meals, and that is going down brilliantly in the community. And we've got young people volunteering there and getting that experience of volunteering in a community cafe. So there has been a shift. But I like what you're saying about social supermarkets. I think we need to kind of move on from giving people things to people feeling that they're actually contributing to a way to kind of deal with the issues that they're facing. Because you're right, it's not going away.
And Joyce has just put into the chat about growing food and growing our own food. So from a United Kingdom perspective, again, by the end of the Second World War, the UK was almost self-sufficient in food supply, because we can grow most of our own food, and everybody had an allotment. Public parks were turned into allotments. Any spare piece of ground was turned into allotment. But we're actually a couple of generations away from that, and people have lost contact with growing their own food, with health and nutrition, because access to food has been reasonably easy. But that is, again, one of the points, is how can we re-engage people with the experience of growing food, of understanding where it comes from, of cooking, of budgeting. Even in if you like a developed westernized country kind of context, there are a lot of skills, that basic skills that we should have, that we don't have anymore, that we've abdicated responsibility to fast food and to supermarkets, and we've actually lost a lot of skill that we should have had just naturally.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Louise, your point, I think, is really well made in the way in which COVID has shone a light on a lot of the systemic inequality that we knew existed. And there is still a huge amount of work in relation to working with communities around addressing those challenges, not least in terms of some of the conversation we've been having. And if we had more time, I'm sure Chris could say more about then the anti-poverty strategy work as well, which is a longer term kind of looking at some of that systemic inequality and disadvantage. But we are rapidly running out of time for our workshop, I'm afraid. I did notice one question there from Dan around the participants and were they all involved in engaging with a local project. The majority of the participants, Dan, were from, well, all the participants were from community and voluntary sector organisations locally based within the borough, the majority of which were involved in continuing to provide a range of support and so on, depending on the nature of the group and organisation that they were. Some of them were more directly active on the ground, as in Donna and Chris here today. Others less so, but were more virtually focused on providing support. So we had some on the programme who were providing counselling facilities and services. And that was very much in a virtual space, but still critical in terms of what they were dealing with, at a community level. And then the ones with older people, the organisations that work with older people, some of that was like telephone services and Zoom calls and those kinds of things. But a lot of people were involved in direct activity on the ground. But it's 19 minutes past, and I think we're due to finish at 20 past. So I guess we better draw to a close. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. If you have any links that you'd like to share in terms of practice, please do put it into the chat now. And we'll just leave that for a minute or two to let people click onto. But really appreciate all of you joining our workshop today. It's been lovely to meet you, and hope you continue to enjoy the rest of the conference. And Dee, thanks for staying with us. You didn't pop off to bed.